My best books of 2024 so far this year are a little bit of a sorry bunch, but we move, we move. So the way that I do my mid-year best books check-in is a little bit different to how I do the end of the year. So not all of these books are guaranteed to be on my best books of the year list by the time we get to the end of 2024, because to keep a little bit of mystery, to not give away everything, in this video I'm going to be talking about my favorite book from each month of the year so far. So I'm pretty sure that for February we have a 3-star read, which honestly I enjoyed, but I don't remember that much about at this point, which is why I'm like, these are a sorry bunch of books. 3 of the 5 are 5 stars, and only 1 I would say is like a true best book of the year 5-star. I think I really struggled at the beginning of the year, but I feel like now we've hit the middle. I kind of hit my stride a little bit more, and I'm reading a little bit more than I enjoy. I'm also DNFing a lot more liberally, which is helping as well because I'm wasting less time on books that I'm giving like a 3-star. And I feel like at the beginning of the year I was just kind of maybe in a little bit of a rut. As I said, we will be going through these from month to month, starting with January, ending in June, and we're just gonna get straight into it because this video doesn't really need any more introduction. So my best book of January was a memoir, and it was The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. So this one I listened to on audio. I did give it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and it is as you can imagine, it's about Britney's life. And if you guys didn't know, for the last like, is it 15, 20 years, she was in a conservatorship that she was put in by her family, which essentially implies that she is not fit to look after herself. So somebody else has to be in charge of everything to do with her life, like her work, her finances, her personal life, who she can and cannot see. And conservatorships are normally used in extreme situations, but the thing that happened with Britney that is so sad that it was allowed to happen by everybody involved, because obviously she's like an international superstar, is that while this conservatorship implies that she's unfit to live a life and like behave like an adult, her family was still forcing her to work throughout this. So they sent her on tour, they forced her to make music she didn't want to make, and she had no say about whether she did these things or not. So the whole kind of situation is like, well, if she's unfit to do all of these things, how can she be fit to work? How can she be fit to go on tour? So she's actually very recently managed to break out of this conservatorship, but this is not only the story of that, although that is the main thing that people were kind of reading this book for, it's the story of her entire life. And it was an emotional one, it was a shocking one, and she hasn't just faced hardship in the last 15 years of her life either. Her childhood was very enlightening to read about. I did give this one 5 stars, mainly because of how engaging and also like shocking and emotional that it was. I don't really have much else to say about it because it's just a memoir. I did listen to the audiobook, which is not narrated by Britney herself. It is narrated by Michelle Williams, who did a really good job of it, and I'd recommend you guys check out the audiobook as well. A little bit of an unconventional 5-star read for me because it is a non-fiction, which I do tend to rate highly, but I'm obviously like not as emotionally invested, and I'm not critiquing them the same way that I do fiction. So my favorite book that I read in February was a 3-star read. It is not a best book by any means, but it was the best of the bunch, and it was a good time. Like, I enjoyed it, and that is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. So this one is a fairy tale, like a modern fairy tale about a, let's see if I can even remember this. It is about a girl whose oldest sister is married to a prince, and shortly after they're married, her sister dies and is sent home, and her next oldest sister is sent to replace her and become like the queen or the princess. So our main character is then sent to a convent, and the reason that she's sent there is because if she were to be married and have any heirs herself, with her sister being married to a prince, then they would technically be a like competition for the heir to the throne if the main character had children before her sister had children. So while she's at the convent, she does go to visit her sister a couple of times, and her sister kind of warns her that if anything happens to her, that the main character should not take her place, like she should do everything in her power to avoid it. And she kind of tells her parents and the people around her that her sister has warned her that her husband is not a nice man, and everyone's kind of like, well, yeah, we know, but what do you want us to do about it? He's a prince. So the main character goes to a grave witch and asks the grave witch for a way to kill the prince, and the grave witch sets her like a series of impossible tasks. Now, the book itself is not about the impossible tasks. That section does wrap up quite quickly. It is more about the journey that the characters go on to go and kill the prince to like free her sister. So I thought thought that this did a really good job of being a modern fairy tale. It had a certain level of whimsy to it. It had a kind of like adventure story style, we go from A to B kind of structure throughout it. And as they went, they were kind of like meeting all of these characters and exploring new locations before they moved on to the next place, kind of like The Wizard of Oz. So I thought that it did a very good job of being a fairy tale and like having the morals of a fairy tale, the structure, like the purpose of a fairy tale, with this little bit of like a darker message underneath, which I mean all fairy tales have. Obviously a more feminist spin on it than a traditional fairy tale. The problem is that with these types of stories, I do enjoy them while I'm reading them, but they don't particularly stick with me. So yeah, like I think that it did an amazing job of what it set out to do. I just know that it's not going to be a story that sticks with me for a very long time. I mean, it's already pretty much faded into my memory, but if you are somebody who likes that modern fairy tale kind of story, then I definitely think this will be your jam. Now we're moving on to March, where things get a little bit more interesting, because I had my second 5-star read of the year, which was Die Volume 1 Fantasy Heartbreaker. So this one is the first volume in a 4-part comic series following a group of adults who, when they were teenagers, they went to their friend's house to play this like tabletop RPG, like D&D style game that their friend had created for one of their birthdays. And they were all given dice, like they created their characters, and upon the first roll, they were all sucked into this fantasy world, but nobody actually knows where they went. They were missing for, I think, 2 years. And of the 6 that went in, only 5 of them came back out. So this is like 10, 15, probably more like 15 to 20 years after that happened, and they have never told anybody where they've been. So one day one of them receives a die in the post, and he gets the band back together to kind of figure out what exactly this means, and once again they are sucked into this fantastical world. So the reason why I gave this one 5 stars is that I thought that it did a very good job of establishing the story and these characters. The art style is pretty nice. I do like it. It's not my favorite art style that I've ever read. It's a little bit, I want to say, too defined. I prefer my comic art to be, I guess, like a little flatter and a little brighter, but the art is definitely pretty gorgeous throughout. I also like that this is only 4 volumes, so I feel like it has a very tightly woven plot. This is still my favorite installment. I've read 2 so far, just because I feel like this was a little bit more concise. It did a very good job of the world building. It did a very good job of establishing the characters, and then it left us kind of at a point where we were waiting for more story to come. When we get into volume 2, the pace of the story slows down a little bit, which is why I didn't like it quite as much, because it didn't feel as like tightly knit. Although I do really like that this is only 4 volumes in total, because it does imply that the creators had a very solid end point in mind that they were trying to get to across like quite a short amount of volumes. I also really liked the way that these people became their characters within the game, and the consequences and the impact that that had on their regular life. And I also really like to see the parallels between the life that they had outside of the game compared to inside of it, and how they kind of like impact each other. So I do aim to finish this. I wanted to finish the entire series in May, but I did not do that. I suck at prioritizing comics because I think that they're so quick that I can read them anytime, and then I read them like never. But hopefully I'll be getting to the end of this one soon. My favorite book of April was one that took me by surprise. I felt like I wasn't expecting to like this, so it far exceeded my expectations, and that was Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma. So in this book, the male main character has an interesting name for one of his body parts, which I had heard about previous to reading this, and that's what put me off. Like, I really thought it was going to be overly cringy and cheesy, and while those elements are not great, they are pretty infrequent, so it didn't bother me all that much. But this one is following a woman who desperately wants to buy the house that she lives in. She lives with her family, and the house that they live in is one that was like her mother's pride and joy, and her mother has sadly passed away. So she asks her father, when she finds out that he's selling it, to retire to Florida, and she says that she can only buy it from him if she gets married, and she is obviously opposed to this because she doesn't see why she should have to get married to be able to buy the house. So she ends up going on a date with this guy called Prem Verma, who is the host of a TV show called Dr. Dill, where I think he discusses heart health and he doesn't believe in love. So the main character, Karina, goes on a date with him and they have a great time, but the day after, her sister is actually going to be somebody, like a guest on his show, and she has no idea it's going to be him, but she arrives, she hears how he doesn't believe in love, how he thinks it's just like science, biology, hormones that make you believe you're in love, and she goes off on him, not realizing that her sister is streaming to the internet, like the entire thing. So he actually loses a bunch of investors that were going to be critical to him opening his own like community health center, and his mother has said that she will give him a bunch of money if he gets married. And then on top of that, these two decide to fake date Karina so that she can potentially get the house money off her dad, and him so that he can kind of repair his reputation for the sake of the investors, but also potentially get this money off his mother as well. So the interesting thing about this as well is that it is fake dating, but it's kind of a reluctant fake dating where they're almost falling for each other while they're debating whether they should fake date. And Karina is a hopeless romantic. She just can't get past the fact that Prem doesn't believe in true love, and he is not only far too practical, but he has things in his past that make him believe that love is a lie. I really liked the banter between these two. I thought that it was fire. It was top tier. I also think that this was the perfect length. It's like just over, oh no, it's 360 pages. So it wasn't like too short, but it wasn't straight into the territory of being like, I don't think contemporary romances over 400 pages are necessary. I feel like 400, maybe just past that are the limit. So this was kind of the perfect length. It was a really good time. It dealt with some like harder hitting topics like grief, but was overall just like really funny, enjoyable, and the sexual tension was amazing. My best book of the year so far was a May read. May was actually a great month. I had 2 5-star reads, which are definitely going to be on my best books of the year list. But my favorite of the 2 was A Little Hatred by Jo Abercrombie, and this was a very surprising one for everyone involved. I have a very rocky history with the first Law World. I really liked the first trilogy, but was disappointed by the ending. I didn't really love any of the standalones, and I didn't like the collection of short stories. So by the time we got to this point in the series, I was pretty much convinced that I just wasn't gonna have a good time with it. So this like blew my mind and took me completely by surprise. I think that some of the criticisms we had about the first trilogy were definitely ironed out in here, which is what allowed me to give this one a 5-star as opposed to like the 4-star rating that I gave the first book in the first trilogy. And you can also see that like Jo Abercrombie has come on quite a lot. I also just feel like when he writes a standalone story, he still has quite a large cast of characters, and my problem with the standalones is that I kind of get muddled and confused and bored, and then I'm not really following the story because I don't care enough, because I feel like he tries to introduce too much at once and I get a little lost. Whereas when he's writing a series, the pacing is a lot slower and it allows me to get really like invested and connected to what's going on. So this one is following characters that are all related to characters from the first trilogy or from the standalones, and I can't even tell you what this series is about because it's not necessarily that it's spoilers, it's just that this plot is made out of lots of tiny little components of the first trilogy and the standalones to kind of create this political climate that the characters are currently having to navigate. I guess the key important part of this trilogy specifically is that the industrial age has started to kick in this world, and that has put this world on the brink of a worker revolution, which was something that would have never happened previously in the first Law universe. So as well as the kind of old foes that these characters are going to have to face, like the people and the countries that were threatening war in the first trilogy, they also have this kind of rising of the social lower classes to potentially destabilize the royalty and the nobility of this world, which many of our main characters are a part of. So the main difference between this and the first series for me is that the characters in this one are not inherently terrible. In the first series, they all have backstories where they have done or are continuing to do like really horrible things, and while there are, I guess, likable elements to them, it's more that they're very interesting characters than that they're heroes in any way. So the difference with this one is that these characters are pretty young. They're in their early to mid-20s for the most part, and they have mainly existed in peacetime. So they're a little privileged, they're a little ignorant, they're a little coddled, but they haven't had time or reason to do truly heinous acts like the characters of the first series have. So the effect that this had on me is that I actually am rooting for these characters. The points of high tension in here really mattered to me because I know that Joe Abercrombie doesn't pull his punches a lot of the time. I know that he kills characters. I know that we have a lot of gore and death in this series. So I was actually invested in the outcome of some of the events in ways that I wasn't in the first trilogy. Now this is dangerous because I know how Joe Abercrombie books are, so I feel like by the end of this series either my favorite characters are gonna either be dead or like corrupted beyond redemption. But I'm actually kind of looking forward to it because if I'm emotionally invested, I see lots of turmoil in my future, which is my favorite. So my final best book of the month is another 4-star. This one is for June, and it was tied with another one. I kind of can't really make my mind up, but we're just gonna go with this one because it's been a long time since I've read an installment in this series. So I'm really glad that Shelve It or Scrap It pushed me to pick up book 4 so that I could kind of remember how much I enjoyed it and continue on with the series. But that is Glow by Raven Kennedy. So this one was an indie fantasy romance series, and I have the first 3 books in the indie paperbacks, and then it was traditionally published, and the only way to get book 4 was to get a hardback, which I didn't want. So eventually I did pick up one that, as you can see, was half price just to read, because I also have the Fairy Loot editions of these, and I'm waiting for Fairy Loot to announce books 4 to 6 so that I can have a matching set of the entire thing. But kind of the fact that I was just struggling to get hold of an edition of this, it wasn't on KU, kind of just put me off the series for a while because it's annoying to have to buy a hardback for a book that I don't want in this edition because I have no other option when previously I did, you know? This one is a fantasy romance story following a girl called Auren, who is King Midas's favored. She has actually been gold touched by him, so literally her entire body is gold, and she is kept in a cage in his palace. Now the interesting thing is that she actually wants to be kept in a cage because previously in her life she had a horrible time essentially, and she was treated terribly by anybody that she encountered in a time of great need, and so she doesn't want anything to do with the outside world. She would rather stay in this cage where she knows she is safe and protected by Midas than venture out into the outside world. She's also in love with Midas, and everything about her life and her beliefs are kind of challenged when Midas decides that he would like to conquer a new territory. He wants to be king of more than just the territory that he's in. So he starts to transport all of his prized possessions to this new location where he can try and conquer this territory. And on the way there, Auren and the people who are with her are taken by raiders and kidnapped, which sets off this string of events where she kind of has to like come into herself and overcome her past to be able to survive. So the thing that I really like about this series is the amount of red flags it gives you. It's difficult because book 4 has very little to do with book 1 at this point, but I just feel like it's a series that is best explored yourself. It has a bunch of content warnings, like big content warning for sexual assault in this series. There's also at least one, well there's more than one, but there's one very specific gnarly like mutilation scene, and abuse and trauma is generally just a big theme that like runs throughout this series. And this book in particular was quite slow. It had a lot of slow moments between the main character and the love interest that we haven't had much opportunity for since I want to say book 2, but this is kind of like a very different situation that they're in, and I've definitely appreciated that. I also definitely appreciated the depiction of trauma in here and the recovery, which kind of goes through several stages, including like self-hatred, depression, and I really liked seeing the main characters kind of overcome these things together while they were growing closer at the same time. It was a very slow book, which is why I gave it 4 stars and like not a 5, but in true like indie fantasy romance fashion, the last 50 to 100 pages of this were fire, like they were 5-star material. And of course it ended on a massive cliffhanger to be explored in book 5. So this just made me really fall in love with this series again, and I am desperate to read book 5. The issue is though is that I'm in the same situation I was with this, where the only way I can get my hands on book 5 is to buy a physical copy that I don't want, because it won't match either my Fairy Loot editions or the paperback copies that I have of this series so far. So yeah, my hope is that Fairy Loot will announce books 5 to 6 soon, with book 6 being released I think next month. It's some point in the second half of 2024. So fingers crossed that will happen. I have also put in a purchase request in my library, which we'll see if that comes through for me as well. But those were my favorite books of the year so far by month. Some were definitely better than others. I am kind of tired of reading books that I don't really like. I can't lie. It's grinding me down, and it's hard because like recently I've read a book that I'd heard really great things about by an author that I've previously like really enjoyed. So I thought I was gonna love it, and I just thought it was kind of mid. So it's not even like I'm intentionally reading books that I'm not necessarily that excited about. Like sometimes I'm reading books that I am excited about and they're not coming through for me either. But please, can we all manifest some like real strong 5-star reads for me in the second half of the year? Because I need them. I need them. I do. This video is of course also the start of my mid-year content. So if you guys are looking for some videos recapping 2024 so far, but also potentially looking forward to the rest of the year a little bit, then you are in the right place. So stay tuned. But down in the comments, let me know what your guys' best book of the year so far is. Out of these 6 that we've talked about today, it's A Little Hatred, which is my favorite. And if you guys would like to let me know that you were here, but you don't really feel like you have anything to say, leave me a star emoji down in the comments. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Patreon if you'd like to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.